I am absolutely delighted that you're here today because we have a very special speaker, Susan Stausberg, here. And I'm absolutely delighted that Susan's agreed to do this for us. Let me tell you a little bit about Susan. Susan relocated to Austin, Texas from New York in 2010. And since arriving here in Austin, she's co-founded and developed a next-generation financial search platform that she calls 9W Search. In 1995, Susan co-founded Edgar Online, things that we take for granted today, and indeed was a startup and a very successful startup. At Edgar Online, she served for 13 years as CEO and secretary until her retirement in 2007, and additionally took on the role as president from 2003 through 2007. Edgar Online is a leading provider of interactive business and financial data in global companies, to financial, corporate, and advisory professionals. The company was a pioneer in the information industry revolution, using cutting-edge technology to bring high value to publicly available data and to democratize access to information that was formerly unavailable to non-professionals. Under Ms. Stausberg's leadership, Edgar Online became an international recognized brand in the trusted source for the SEC filings, while at the same time delivering value-added applications that produce the fastest and most accurate financial information in the market still today. She was instrumental in developing strategies that produced subscription and license-based revenue models, as well as leveraging business partnerships to grow revenues and brands. These models developed many years before others copied those models in what they were doing. She took the company public in 1999, raising $34 million. She also managed other financing as well as 2 acquisitions. The number of employees and contract workers was at a high of 200, locating in several different areas, including Connecticut, New York, Rockville, Maryland, and India. Edgar Online was acquired by R.R. Donnelley in 2012 for over $70 million. Prior to founding Edgar Online, Ms. Stausberg co-founded Internet Financial Network, or IFN, an Edgar-based financial information vendor, and IFN was acquired by American Online, a division of Time Warner. Ms. Stausberg's extensive experience in the information and publishing arenas began in the 1970s when she co-founded a publishing company specializing in providing custom-made textbooks to the college market. During this time, she also edited and published The Woman's Guide to Books, a 2-volume catalog of works written by notable women. She was aided in this venture by a board of consultants ranging from Gloria Steinman, Joan Gans Cooney of the Children's Television Network, Nora Ephraim, and 14 other thought leaders of the period. She went on to establish a book fulfillment company in partnership with the McCall magazine to become a supplier of the books featured in her catalogs. Note, we're on her 4th startup venture. Also working in film development, where she provided another vehicle for her information packaging and presentation skills. In 1972, she started her own film development company that co-produced a documentary about Kansas City jazz entitled The Last of the Blue Devils. Following that, she produced It Came from Hollywood, a Paramount Pictures film. Her earliest employment was at the Foreign Policy Association, followed by a 2-year assignment to Hunter College as a manager of a U.S. Department of Education grant, and funded the development of curriculum materials aimed at the education needs of disadvantaged inner-city children. Ms. Stausberg has received numerous awards recognizing her success as a businesswoman. She has been featured in many articles as the CEO spokesperson for Edgar Online and as the subject of a chapter in .com Divas. I love that. A compilation of biographies of important women in the emerging internet business world. She has appeared on industry panels to discuss financial and business issues, as well as emerging trends in the information industry. She was formerly on the board of RKO Pictures, and she graduated from the Sarah Lawrence College and has served on the college as a presidential advisory committee member. There's many more things I could tell you about Susan, but for those of you counting, I think you counted at least 5 startups there. So I think we truly have a serial entrepreneur live here tonight. Susan, tell us more about some of the things we've just briefly touched on.
Well, I'm exhausted. It took a long time to do all of that. But first of all, I want to thank you, Laura, for inviting me to be here. This is a very a wonderful program, and you've been a wonderful friend. And
You're very nice.
McCombs is very, very smart to have you
Thank
here
you.
doing what you're doing. So, okay, just for my own edification, how many entrepreneurs in the room? Students? Some of the same, right? Some of the same hands went up? Okay, any friends of mine? And is my husband here? Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go approach my little time with you from the opposite end, and I'm going to try to plow through so that there can be some questions asked. So I'm going to start with a story that sort of puts my career in some kind of perspective or focus. When my daughter was 6 years old, she was attending a fancy private school in New York City. And as was the custom at the school, it was always desperately important that there be fundraisers to benefit this school of overprivileged children. And so one day, all of the mothers of her class were called together to have a luncheon to plan an important fundraising event. And somehow I let it be known during this luncheon that I in some way could help the activity because I had an office and I might be able to do some copying for them or something of the sort. At which point, everyone looked at me with shocked amazement, and one woman said, both with pity and some disgust, "Oh, you work. Well, then this must be your lunch hour." And I said, I couldn't let that pass, of course, and so I said, well, not really. I own my own publishing company, and I kind of can come and go as I please. And then I thought to myself, oh, my poor daughter, she'll never have another play date because I'm a pariah in her world. So back a little further, though, I was the only child of a devoted family. I was expected to be pretty and smart and go to college and get married. And both of my grandparents came from, my grandfathers were entrepreneurs, and they had all come from Eastern Europe, and their main focus in life was to be successful and successful enough to send all of their children to college, and to Ivy League colleges, which they did. And my father was thought more outside the box, but had a lot of those same genes. And of key importance to both of my parents was that I have a great education. And for me, and they understood me well enough to know that I wasn't an average kind of a person. I was somewhat aberrant. It was clear to them. It wasn't clear to me. I thought I was perfectly normal. But they encouraged me to go to the college that I wanted to go to, which was Sarah Lawrence College. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Sarah Lawrence, but it's what's called a progressive school with a very different kind of curriculum. And what it does is it teaches each individual student to find their own solutions to things. It's very individualistically structured and very free form. In addition, even today, many, many years since I've been there, the school had absolutely no notion or connection with the concept that any of the students who went there would ever have careers of any sort. We were supposed to get married, or at least we were going to be poets, or we were going to do something sort of soft and cozy, and there was absolutely no, there simply was no guidance in that direction at all. But again, what we learned to do was to think outside the box and to not be afraid to have a new idea and to somehow believe that we could be right about things. So during school and at my first job at the Foreign Policy Association and so forth, I began to learn some things about myself because nobody bothered to ask me to figure them out or counsel me for graduate school and so forth. So somehow I knew I was a leader, and that could have been interpreted by my friends as being a bossy person, but in any event, people tended to line up behind me sometimes, so that worked. And I like to throw myself into things and then figure them out afterward. And I also always sort of thought I could work things out. I could figure them out. And I was analytical and logical. I was open to new things, and I like to work, and I really like to work hard. And I was also trustworthy and loyal and very transparent, I think from a very early age. And transparency is very important to me. And I was rebellious, and I didn't have much respect for the norm. So I was kind of fun to be with. So
You still are fun to be with.
well, I certainly hope so. So Sheryl Sandberg's take on the career ladder is that it's not a ladder, it's more like a jungle gym. And my story, and probably many of your stories, maybe you're probably better trained than I was. I was winging it all the time. But I didn't know where I was going to wind up, but I suspected I'd wind up in media or publishing, which is what interested me. But I did not have a clear path at all. I did know I needed to be independent. I knew I wanted to work with in an environment that was creative and make a difference. Making a difference was really important. So I had majored in political science, so it was not illogical that I started my first job at the Foreign Policy Association, and then I went to work at Hunter College on a specialist research project. And fortunately, there's always some luck in these stories. We're supposed to say there's no such thing as luck. It's all hard work, and it's true. But I was really quite lucky at Hunter College because I met a man who was who's sitting over here, who had invented a custom-made book publishing company and was also working with me at Hunter to publish the results of a research grant that we were involved with. And after a couple of years of working together with me at Hunter College, we suddenly realized that there was something more between us than business. It took a long time to figure it out. It was very plotting. And so ultimately we did get married, and I joined his company, and over time we sold the company to Simon & Schuster, which should have been, everybody should say yay, right? Well, it was an awful experience. I was so inexperienced that I didn't even know how, it took, what, within a year, I had forced them to fire both of us, but because I could not cope with a big organization. I didn't like the fact that we were paying the overhead of the chauffeur of the company and so on. And so one day, out of the blue, complete surprise, they came and fired me. They fired my husband, and they left us with no severance and with a little baby at home. So I guess that I was a risk taker without even knowing it. And you could say suicidal, but that really wasn't the case. I clearly wasn't. I was going to do something else. So we had no non-compete. And within 5 days, we had funding for a new venture that was going to do just what we had been doing at Simon & Schuster. And the person who came, again, luck and intelligence, there was a man named William Casey, whom some of you may have heard of, and I'll tell you who he was. He ultimately became the head of the CIA. He was also a pioneer in the information business and in the publishing business. And he had met Mark at our original publishing company and said, if any day you are interested in talking to me further about what you're doing, here's my card. And so 2 days after we were fired, Mark called him and he said, they had one meeting, and he said, I like the cut of your jib, and I'm going to be, and let's go into business together. We'll be one-third partners, Susan, Mark, and Bill Casey. And Mark went off and got a job at another publishing company, and I started a new custom-made book program. And so I think my lesson here, I'm supposed to be telling you lessons, was you just keep on trucking. I mean, if you can do it in 3 days, you do it in 3 days. If it takes you 3 years, which it's taken me to do my current venture, just keep on trucking. So then I've told, and Laura mentioned this too, that while we were running this publishing company and publishing something like 1,000 books a year, and with a pretty large group of people to help us, I was able to explore all kinds of passions of my own, and the Women's Guide to Books was certainly that. The reason that I undertook to do it, aside from the fact that I just plain wanted to and I was curious about the subject, and obviously I was able to get some other people like Gloria Steinem and Flo Kennedy and so forth interested in this, was because at the time anything that ever came out of the women's movement was a complete mess. Books were published and half the pages were bound upside down. If somebody handed a pamphlet to you, it had chicken salad on it or something. And so I just simply couldn't bear the idea that women were always going to be looked at as these kinds of sloppy souls. So I undertook to create a series of two beautiful books that actually had quite a lot of, got a lot of attention, brought some very, some hidden gems to light, and I was able to establish enough of a business to also encourage McCall's, who was extremely anti-feminist, to support this venture because they just sort of knew where the world probably was going, and they didn't want to take any chances. Then subsequently, I established a film development company and optioned some books and stories. And I co-produced 2 films, and while I was doing all of this, I began to realize, because I wasn't wandering, but I didn't know where my career, if there was going to be what was called a career, that I began to realize that what I was really good at was taking disparate pieces of information and putting them together, reorganizing them in ways that made them better. So at our book publishing company, we asked professors to tell us what journal articles they wanted their students to read, and then we sought the rights to those articles and published them in book form and reformatted them. And then in my film, it came from Hollywood. We did the same thing. We got rights and clearances to thousands and thousands of terrible films and glued them all together and made a comedy that Paramount did a pretty bad job distributing, but it was interesting. And more or less, I began to know that was what I was good at, was the reorganization of information and data. And also, at the same time, we became interested with no training in computers, these strange things that we had, an early compact that was bigger than a sewing machine, and we learned how to play hangman on it, and then actually to realize that you could do something with information that we hadn't ever been able to do before in publishing. So, and we kept watching and looking and saying, what's the new thing? Where can we make a difference? Because we didn't want to, neither one of us liked to do things that had been done before. So at around that time, there was this thing called the internet that had come into being, and none of our friends had any interest in it whatsoever. But this was the mid-90s, and the thunderbolt struck because not only was the internet important, and of course many people saw that, but although many people did not think anyone could make any money from it. But in addition to that, the whole financial landscape, in our opinion, was going to change because the EDGAR system, which is the electronic system of filings, of SEC filings, had been introduced, and we assumed that everybody in the world who was involved in financial information, consuming, publishing, and so on, would recognize this tremendous opportunity, and much to our amazement, none of them had. And I think you probably are going to want to ask me a lot about EDGAR Online. I'm going to go past that now and leave those questions for later. But it turned out that we saw an opportunity that no one else saw, and we therefore licensed the name EDGAR from the SEC and incorporated it into our name, EDGAR Online. And we went out with our own meager funds to invent something that we thought would change the world of information. And effectively, we were right. We were right in our bet that this was going to make a change. But then we had a company. We had actually, I had maybe 30 or 40 people at our publishing company, but starting this new venture was going to be very, very disruptive. And so I had to leverage a lot of skills that I had developed along the way. Whenever I did any of these smaller ventures, we of course had people working for us, and it was kind of naturally easy for me, being a bossy leader, to put together a company. And the most important thing to me was to be able, which I think is a lesson, was to be able to empower people to work with us. That I believed in the democratization of information and also the democratization of a work environment. And then we had to raise money for this company after we bootstrapped it a little bit. And all of our investment came through strategic investors. We did not, are there any venture capitalists in the room? Oh, good. Well, not good. But in any event, our investors were all strategic. And then after a suitable period of time, in 1999, we took the company public at a great valuation. So then I ran the company for 13 years, and my husband was the chairman. We grew it to $20 million in revenue with about 200 employees, as Laura said. And we kept breaking new ground, but we really weren't able to scale the way I felt that we should be able to. And then in 2003, we had a terrific offer to be acquired by MarketWatch. It was great for us personally. It was great for the shareholders. We were excited about it. It was going to allow Edgar Online to be incorporated into a bigger platform that would then allow our ideas to grow further. In theory, we were going to continue to be involved, and it also was a great exit from a monetary standpoint. And unfortunately, my two key employees blew up the deal the day before we were supposed to close, which was taught me a couple of lessons, which was, I savored the moment, because it may not always be there. And there are certain things that you just simply can't delegate. And this was an interesting example because it felt very final to me. And what I then had to do was to fire the president and assume his responsibilities as well as my own, which was not an easy thing to do with a public company. But we did it, and we motored on, and I ran the company for another 4 years. And then finally was able to leave. And I left with a 3-year non-compete, which left us a lot of time to think about what the next venture was going to be. One of the things we decided was that the next venture was going to be in Austin. And that was for a number of reasons. I suppose, admittedly, I would say that we expected that there'd be a liquidity event at Edgar Online, and we didn't think that we needed to be in New York and pay New York taxes once that happened. But in addition, Austin was a technology center from our perspective. We had some very good relationships here, and one of our daughters lived here as well. So there was a lot to make us come here, and there's a lot to make us stay here. So about 2 years ago, we had the next aha moment, and my non-compete was up at that time, and we realized that many of the things that we had developed at Edgar Online had so significantly changed the landscape of information and data that the next venture, which is called 9W Search, was going to, it does leverage the new data forms that we created. I won't go into the technical details except to say that 9W Search is an answer engine that basically takes all the information from all public company filings, going back 5 years, although they could go back as far as 15 years, and make them available on mobile devices or on a desktop to answer any question that anybody has about financial business questions without having any particular training at all in finance or in how to read balance sheets and income statements and so forth. And our view of this was that, once again, this is an opportunity to democratize access to information and make it available to people who probably, I would say, 80% or more of the workforce who need this information but simply don't know how to get it or don't know how to interpret it. So I'd say also that my husband says that 9W is the Siri of financial information because it delivers the one right answer to a question. I'd say it's the Siri with laryngitis because we haven't exactly worked out the voice part of it, but we have people who are thinking about that for us now. And my husband is always on to the next thing. He's our chief information officer, and that's what his job is, to think about the next move. So we have a product in the marketplace. I would welcome all of you to sign up. Go to www.9wsearch.com. We've just closed a deal with The Street, which you've probably heard of, which is a financial website in New York that has 2 million users a day. We're baked into their stock quote so that if anybody goes to The Street, they can see more company information and financial information from 9W. We're working on other partnerships like that that can't be discussed now. We're working with several accounting firms who want to incorporate us into the tool sets that they provide to their clients. And we have an amazing starting team, starting with my first employee at Edgar Online, who has, these many years, come on board with us at 9W. And so, you know, I hope this time, my expectation is that the scope and the scale of 9W will be realizable either through our own growth or through mergers or whatever path we get taken on. But this time we're not going to let anybody else make sure that we don't get to make that deal. And since I'm really now in my comfort zone, because what I like is the beginnings of things, and that's where I am right now. So the next stages will be challenging. So I guess that my key lessons are that you need to be educated, which obviously you all are, confident, flexible, resilient, self-aware, ambitious, and skate where the puck is going, not where it's been. A hackneyed phrase, but I think that's what's been our driver. And there are a lot of issues that I haven't touched on, and so I hope I've allowed enough time for questions.
This is great.
Thank you.
Susan, what comes out in some of the conversation and some of your history is an incredible sense of creativity, of being able to see things that other people do not seem to be able to see. An opportunity, a need. You know, do you think that's, you know, kind of inherent in your nature, or?
I do. Well, I think it's embarrassing to say, but you know, I think that part of being iconoclastic and part of what makes me excited are new things that haven't been done before. So I look for them, and you know, like a moth through a flame. Most people would run screaming from the challenge of starting a new financial information company, but to me, that's what I was kind of meant to do. So I never think of myself as being creative. I don't write poetry or any of those things, but I think that that's a very flattering statement, and I appreciate it. I think that within the range of things that I understand, I tend to see opportunities that maybe other people don't, and so does my partner.
It seems like you just, even if you see that opportunity, as many of us do every day, you don't ignore it. You go, wow, there's something there. I mean, Edgar Online, who would have thought of going to the federal government to license the name?
Yes, well, isn't that the nature of entrepreneurship, is that you're kind of like a wild-eyed optimist and there aren't any obstacles, and if there's an opportunity, you pursue it. I mean, that was you're quite right. I mean, people, when we talked about Edgar Online to our wise and wealthy friends, they all said, you're absolutely crazy. I mean, who's going to pay money for information that's already out there, and who's going, and the government is delivering this, so who's going to buy this, and so on. And no one thought that this made any sense, and we absolutely, totally knew that we were right. I mean, we read the market, and they didn't care as much as we did, and so I guess it takes a lot of guts, but that's what we do.
But in taking a lot of guts, do you consider yourself a risk taker, or do you not see it as risk?
I've learned to see it as risk. I personally and physically, I'm not a risk taker at all. I'm scared. You know, I don't ski. I'm afraid to play tennis. Somebody might hit me in the face with a tennis ball. I mean, there are all kinds of risks that I don't take. But I find, I mean, but I know by now, I've been told enough times, that certainly we are risk takers. And my children certainly know that, because they're far more conservative than we are. They lived with two entrepreneurial parents, and there are ups and downs in that world, and they all have secure jobs, and I know that's because we're risk takers. So the answer is yes.
And if you don't mind me asking, it's less usual, not unusual, less usual, to have a husband and wife team that are both entrepreneurs and both play a role in a company, and have consistently one company after another. I know Mark Stausberg is here. Thank you, Mark, for coming tonight, who is your partner in entrepreneurship. Does that bring you extra benefits?
Yes. To me, it brings tremendous benefits. For one thing, I think that it's very important to have a partner, whether the partner is a spouse or whatever. It's just terribly important. It's particularly important, I think, for women. I mean, I am completely rife with insecurities. You can't tell that, but the fact is I am. You can't tell that. And it's my husband's job every day to fluff me up and tell me that I can do it. He knows he can do it, but I think that's that is an important part, is to have somebody that you know is always going to be confident. Doesn't mean that we agree about everything. We agree about very little, except our ultimate goals. We approach things very differently. So I think that also there's a lot of risk in going into a business with your spouse, because investors tend to not like married couples as founders, and we certainly have found that over the years, and that's led us down certain paths in terms of the kind of investors that we seek, because a lot of people just simply think that that it can't work. Well, we're here to say that it's worked for a very long time for us.
Great.
Yeah.
As a woman going out as a CEO of a company to raise capital, how did you find that? Or how do you find that as you're doing that? You continue to do that.
I think by now, I'm kind of a known factor, and so people don't find it that easy to dismiss my abilities. And I'll say mine, because that's my job, is to do the money raising, and I do it by myself. There are many challenges that women face, and I certainly do face all of them, but I don't let anybody know that I'm aware that they're actually saying, oh, this is a woman, because we've proved that we can do it. I've proved that I can do it. So I think there are a lot of hidden issues. Laura and I have discussed some of them. I mean, age is an issue. We're not 20 years old. Maybe some of you are. And I think that's a secret, something secret that's in people's minds when they hear about these ideas, but that our experience probably overrides that, I hope.
Well, we often think today that you have to be, if you're an entrepreneur, you're sub 30 years old. In fact, it may surprise everyone to know that the largest, fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country are the over 50-year-olds at the moment, for the first time in history.
Yes.
So I think we perhaps have a barbell effect of the very experienced and the very not experienced, and it's kind of an interesting phenomenon to think about. I'd like to start asking you to move to the microphones if any of you have questions. We want very much your questions to be involved, and take this opportunity to talk to Susan.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
It's great to hear about your experience. And I'm curious, in launching the site, if you elected to go with almost like a more beta version of it, or a minimum viable product, as opposed to the fully fleshed out. I know you're still working on things, but I'm working on a similar project in a different arena, and I'm torn in terms of, do you just get out there and start working on it to build brand, or do you wait so that somebody bigger and stronger doesn't come along and trounce you?
Well, it's a great question. The rule is you're supposed to build a minimally viable product, and I tried to do that. And for somebody with a reputation and some history behind me, I found it hard to put the first or second or third draft out there. So we've taken longer in crafting this thing, because although it's still, I can't say it's imperfect, but it's a work in progress, and this business is always a work in progress. I think that in my particular space, nobody else is likely to do what we're doing. So we don't have that urgency of time. We have urgency around money because we're bootstrapping this, and we obviously would like to bring in investors, and investors won't come until there's some actual behavior and traction. But in general, perfect is the enemy of good, and if you don't do it, it won't get done. So you have to balance that and look in the mirror hard and be sure that you look around yourself and be sure that there isn't somebody coming up behind you, because then you have to rethink what you're doing.
Susan, before we go to the next question, how do you keep track of what you think might be someone coming up behind you, a competitor, someone trying to do the same thing?
Well, I read about 15 trades a day. I have connections within the industry, and I know what's happening. I'm actually very fortunate that my sales team at Edgar Online have now taken leadership positions throughout Wall Street at all the major information companies, and they are my sources of information. So I actually know what's happening even under the hood and in stealth mode at much bigger information companies. So I think that's how I know.
So don't underrate the network of present employees, ex-employees, industry.
Really important.
Really important.
Yeah.
That's a good message. Thank you. I know we have a different question.
I think. All right. Thank you so much for coming to share your story with us. This is just wonderful to hear from a serial entrepreneur and hear about your experience. I, like you, have this insatiable desire for information. I love reorganizing things, and so please forgive me for asking questions that are really kind of impersonal, but just designed to just wring as much information out of you as possible. I was wondering if you could tell us kind of what your biggest mistakes were along the way, and what skills you think entrepreneurs need to have in the information industry, and how else can we monetize this desire to and this ability to assimilate information? Do we need to open up an information website in a particular niche, or are there other ways to kind of monetize this ability and this love of learning and this love of knowledge?
Okay.
So mistakes, skills, monetizing, love of information.
Okay. I've made no mistakes. Everything has been deliberate. So just put that question aside.
No, but I'm going to ask you, seriously, do you think entrepreneurs look back at what they have done and reinterpret those things that we might otherwise call mistakes?
Maybe so, and maybe I left out a few points that were just sort of blips, but so I think you learn something every day, and I don't think that mistakes or failures are, I know we're all supposed to say that the best thing you can do is stand up and fall down and get up again and so on, and I'm assuming that that's so, but it depends on how you view that. I mean, we have had some many experiences that have been less than wonderful, and I have to tell you that I have to dig deep to even bother to think about them today. Did I learn something from them? Yes. I learned a lot of things about human nature that saddened me. But in general, I tend to have to be pushed, to have forward momentum, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking of licking wounds. So the next question was, what skills do I have? Well, okay, so I think that you need to be brave. You need to understand your field, and I think that's critically important. And I mean that. I mean, one of the things that sort of most disturbs me is when an entrepreneur, or we'll say an entrepreneur or a fledgling entrepreneur, just doesn't do the research that they need to do, and it becomes very obvious that they haven't bothered, or it hasn't dawned on them that they need to actually look at the marketplace before they come and ask you for your advice or ask you for your money. That if I'm hiring somebody, which I do very little of these days. But if I am, if someone comes for an interview or calls me for an interview, if they haven't Googled me and they haven't gone to 9W and looked at it, that's it. I mean, they have not done their job, and I think that that's really important. And I've seen a lot of that kind of behavior, and a lot of an encouragement of that sort of behavior is that yes, what I do is so great that I don't need to look at anybody else. For the information business in general, how do you make money out of it? Is your question? Well, we have a subscription model and a licensing model, and that's very common in the information business. You're probably thinking more of big data and that I don't know what your specific interest is, but that we create products that people will subscribe to or license for use, for their own use. So it's a thing that they pay for, and that's in other words, we productize the information, and that makes it saleable.
And Susan, when you talk about you productize the information, you are clearly using other parties' channels to
Yes.
get to that customer.
Yes.
That must have been a very conscious choice to go through others in a channel partner strategy than directly to the end user customer. Would you like to talk about that a little
Yes,
bit?
actually, thank you. Our first insight in 1996, when we started Edgar Online, was that nobody was going to, we couldn't reach anybody unless they were on the internet. Most people at that time would, theoretically take out an ad in a magazine, and then if somebody wanted to look at your website, they didn't know how to type it in. So my view was, we do not spend a dime on any print advertising. We do nothing other than get our name on the web in a way that people could tap on the URL and get to your site. So that was very radical at its time. And so then what we decided was the best approach to take what we were doing was that we researched, found out every website in the country that had a stock quote on it. And we created partnerships with every single one who did. And we got on a plane with our dog and went to Silicon Valley and went up and down wherever we were, and with appointments, of course. And we'd say, if you have a stock quote, you have to have SEC filings. And people like Yahoo and Pointcast, who existed briefly, and MSN and everybody said, well, of course. And within 4 months, everybody knew who we were. We looked like we were huge, and we owned the space. And we did that through our partners, who then took little smidgens of our information and put it on their sites and then sent traffic through to us. And that was critical to the development of the company. And that's very much the approach that we'll take with 9W too. The other part is that the internet makes it possible for you to have low-priced products. And low-priced products don't call for a sales force unless you have one big enterprise license where you might have one person who does that kind of negotiation. The reality is that you don't have people walking around with briefcases selling $20 a month subscriptions. So that kind of distribution I think is really critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the cost of capturing that customer is very,
very, very low.
very, very low.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a key point
Yes.
of what one looks at perhaps in the information business. Again, please go to the microphone. We have another question.
So I'm going to ask a hard question. If you don't want to answer it, I have an easy one for you.
Okay, go to the easy one.
Okay. So you mentioned something really interesting earlier, that 9W was going to provide data depth back going 50 years. I understand a little bit about your business.
Not 50.
Not 50?
50.
No. 50, I said it
Oh,
could
15.
go back, yeah,
Oh, 1-5.
since the Edgar system began.
Oh, since the Edgar system. Okay, so then I'll discard that question, because my question is going to be, where are you going to get that data from?
The crypt.
Yeah, exactly. So the easier question then is, obviously you're providing a service which is parallel to a feed at a very low cost, and there's vested players in the industry like Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, FactSet, CapIQ, which is S&P, that have an interest in keeping those feeds expensive. Do you think your product competes, and if it does, what are your barriers to prevent them from entering the space?
Good question, and not surprising either. First of all, they have been doing business the same way that they always have been doing business. And for them to actually break apart the content and the data and the information they provide would be extraordinary, very, very costly, would be very, very disruptive. My ability, what I can offer them, whether they'd be interested or not is another question, but what I can offer them is something they can bolt onto their system and provide another unique facility or service to their existing users. When we started Edgar Online, the same players were there, and we were nonetheless disruptive. We didn't put any of them out of, well, we did put a couple of people out of business. Never mind. Poor souls, but I don't know yet how negative the existing players will be toward us. They certainly were the last time around. I would actually sit on panels with people from Reuters and Knight Ridder or whomever the players were, and I was very uncomfortable in those days speaking in public, so it was hard for me to get up on a panel with them. But it really didn't turn out to be very hard at all because they acted as if I wasn't there. I was literally an empty chair. They wouldn't acknowledge me. They wouldn't shake my hand. They would actually just pretend we didn't exist because what we were doing was so disruptive and threatening in a way, even though we didn't have the means to. We never thought that that was what we were all about. We were about democratizing access to information that they had no interest. They didn't have any interest in that audience. They were not going to sell things for less than they were already selling them for, so they weren't going to compete with us. So am I answering the question in the way that you, yes, so the answer is that we can partner, for example, Edgar Online has, Thomson Reuters is a big client of theirs. And they've obviously found a way that there's a space where where the Edgar Online data is needed. 9W could do the same thing for everybody.
Thanks for answering my question.
Oh, that was a very excellent and tough question. So you're out there in the information world with this financial data that people can ask, and how do you differentiate between who is your collaborators and who is your competitors out there, given they seem to me like they can be one and the same depending on which day you're dealing with them?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, they know themselves whether they I won't, although I know we're not on national television, but
you are still on tape.
I'm still on tape. There are several firms, large firms that are well known, who absolutely will not buy, will only build. And so you just know that, and the waste of time involved in changing their mind on one specific thing is not worth the effort. Plus the fact you're opening your kimono if you're really pursuing somebody who absolutely at the end of the day is going to tell you to go away. You may as well stay away from them because they could copy you in a sense. So my view is that we can be Switzerland, and we can fit in anybody's box, and if they don't want us, then that's fine. It's not. I mean, it's just a fact of life. But we also go and look at other markets, and so it isn't that we're aimed directly at the key players in the financial information industry. We're aiming at a corporate market. We're aiming at a very diverse group of people who need knowledge, who are knowledge workers, is what we call them. It's a dull term, but it's true. Who need information and are being underserved with what's available now.
And do you, when you first think about how you're going to get to those end customers through your channel, who are the most likely end customers that will be early adopters from you for your product from your past experience, or are there certain sweet spots you establish relative to the benefits of your product?
Well, they're the low-hanging fruit, as we say. Well, theoretically, the low-hanging fruit here are auditors and accountants because they've been involved from the outset in the development of these new data standards, and they're receptive. Other people are money managers and people who are not that analytical and want a fast answer to a question. in general, and then I think also that the C-level people and marketing and sales and so forth are another sweet spot. And the worst thing anybody can say is that everybody can use this product, and there is no competition. And I'd say that's true. We're focusing on accounting firms, and moving on from there.
Susan, you've been an entrepreneur in both a public and a private company. And then I'm going to go to Mark afterwards. Being someone who's run a public and private company, do you have a preference of which one you would prefer to run, and why?
Well, we felt with Edgar Online that, first of all, we couldn't turn down the money. This was 1999, and you just didn't not go public if you could. And also, I felt that philosophically and aesthetically, that Edgar Online, since it dealt with public company information, should be public, and take all the. I mean, it just made sense to me. I also liked the fact, particularly when things were going very well, that I liked the fact that we always knew what we were worth. The valuation question was already behind us; it was out in the market. Over time, running a small public company is excruciatingly hard, and I probably wouldn't recommend, I wouldn't expect that there are going to be companies like that went public the way we did at that time, and I wouldn't recommend it, and because it winds up being a tremendous distraction. It's very expensive to be public. You basically are paying the same amounts of money for Sarbanes and so forth than billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar companies. So I think that the world now is more of a world of M&A, and where the exits will come, I think, in that area rather than going public.
So always being private. Mark, you had a point.
Yeah, and the question about early adopters, did you discuss your plans for education?
Yes, what an interesting,
users?
I'm
Yes.
so glad you reminded me. One of our earliest initiatives, and one that we're going to be putting some more body power behind, is that we're opening 9W up to the EDU community. We are prepared to say that anybody with an EDU address can register and use the system for free as long as they have an EDU address, and we haven't done a particularly good job yet because, of course, we're still sort of stealthy a little bit in really publicizing that. But we think that's extremely important, and so we therefore will invite all of you who have EDU addresses to go to 9W, and also send me. I mean, I have business cards, but you'll find me somehow, Susan at 9wsearch.com, and send me a note and say that I made this offer to you in this room at this time. And then I'll make 9W available to you, and we've got to get better organized about how we make this known worldwide. We've got a lot of publicity and a lot of media that we have to talk to, but this is a very important initiative, and we think it's going to be. This is where the long-term value of 9W is going to come, is from students who are not as hide-bound to traditional ways of looking at things will embrace this.
Well, fabulous benefit for being here tonight. So www.9wresearch.
9wsearch.com.
There you go. And just ask for Susan. Susan, as we come towards the end of the amazing hour we've had together, tell me, share with us how you're moving forward. What's the next step on 9W? You've conceived of the idea, seen the opportunity, spent 3 years, I think you said in your words, 2 years, pulling together the product, bootstrapping it along, now launching that product, having your first major channel partner and client base growing. What's the next step?
The next step, hopefully, is investment that will give us the put the wind under our sails, or whatever the expression is, and help us grow really, really quickly. We've reached some milestones that are important, and we're also seeing a lot of interest now from investors. And so I'm looking forward to the next 3 or 4 weeks where I somehow have a feeling that something magical is going to happen. But that's also the enthusiasm and the general optimism of an entrepreneur.
Of an entrepreneur.
Yes. But I think that now that the product is built, and now that we have it in other people's hands, that and I've seen enough interest that I believe that this is the right time.
So I guess all we can do is congratulate you on yet another startup as a serial entrepreneur, and for what you've achieved by bootstrapping this company to where it is today. And I guess for those of us who want to jump on quick, we know there's an opportunity coming soon. We have a question.
Yes, you talked just a bit about your children, but how did you juggle everything? People say that having your own company is like having another baby. How did you decide where to put your focus and how to do all of that?
I was never meant to be a stay-at-home mom, and I never didn't work a day in my life. So I organized my life and our life in such a way that, first of all, that we could afford to have really, really, really good help to take care of our children, and to provide, you know, the kinds of facilities that mattered to them. I mean, we lived in New York City, which was the best place in the world to raise children, despite the fact that you probably find that an amazing statement. But it's you do not drive around, go to soccer practice, and all those things that those moms do. We were lucky, or we weren't lucky. We planned so that we had somebody who could get them from place to place, and I didn't have to leave the office. I worked within 10 blocks of our apartment, and so in an emergency, I could always be home, and there never was an emergency in all the years. So we didn't see it as juggling. My children actually felt sorry for people whose mothers were home and hanging around and interfering in their lives, I think. That's basically the answer, and I have absolutely no regrets, and I think my children feel the same way.
So it's don't try and be Superwoman, try and get the help you need, just like you do in business.
Exactly. I mean, this is the person who took care of my children. Their job, I told them their job was as important as mine. I mean, they were not doing menial work. They were doing half of my job. And of course, we were there for the rest of the time. So there was never there didn't seem to be any confusion, at all. And of course, you can't do everything, but you can hire people to do a lot for you.
That certainly helps. Could you come to the microphone? Thank you.
One quick question, though, because male-centric world of corporate America and your leadership within that role, I'm just interested in hearing your views within that role and anyone in this room that wants to step into that role as well.
Can you start just the beginning of the first sentence?
Well, with the way leadership is given and how it's distributed within the corporate environment, with your role as a corporate leader, as a woman, what are your views in comparison to the male aspect of the equation? Does that kind of make sense to you guys?
So you're
male
looking
versus
at
female within the leadership role of the corporate environment.
Of corporate America. So perhaps if I may, and if I'm not asking this correctly, answering this question. So the question, if I can rephrase it, is even today we have fewer women leaders in major corporate America today, whether they be entrepreneurs or just leaders in large corporations versus men. How do you think that's going to evolve out? What do you think the differences might be?
Do I think that there are going to be more women in positions of power? Is that, or
well, just your perspective.
What's your perspective on that?
My perspective, and I think that the fact substantiated, is that women CEOs and companies that are run by women generally perform better than those, strangely, than those run by men. I mean, the statistics seem to all show that. So I guess what that tells me is that it's not hubris, and it's not, there's no reason why a woman shouldn't aspire to be a CEO or run a company and be entrepreneurial, because actually they're better doing it than men.
Which I agree. It's just recently I'm seeing and reading a lot of documentation and research on the subject, and it's interesting. It's motivating. I'm just curious to see what people think. So, but yeah, absolutely.
I think you'll find there's research on diversity of any kind within any group, and especially a leadership group, will actually ultimately bring a higher return or value, because sharing different thoughts is not by sharing differences, it's bringing different perspectives to the table. And I think that's so important. I think for Susan tonight, we had a leader going for a long time within our midst as a woman leader. And I'd like to kind of paraphrase one of the articles and the name she was called tonight. And would you please join me in thanking Susan Stausberg, our .com diva, for being here. Thank you.